Ethan Reed's fingers moved rapidly over the keyboard, his eyes darting back and forth between the multiple monitors on his desk. He was putting the finishing touches on a project proposal, the culmination of days of effort. The office buzzed with the familiar sounds of phones ringing and coworkers chatting, but Ethan blocked it all out, his concentration razor-sharp. Being a project manager, he took pride in his knack for juggling complex tasks and his keen attention to detail. When he glanced at his watch, the time startled him, it was already past 7 p.m. Once again, the hours had slipped away unnoticed. Letting out a weary sigh, he saved his work and began powering down his computer. The day had been a whirlwind of meetings and looming deadlines, leaving him drained. All he wanted now was to head home, unwind, and spend the evening with Samantha. The drive home felt like a welcome retreat after the relentless pace of his workday. As he pulled into the driveway of the cozy suburban house he and Samantha had called home for the past 8 years, Ethan felt the tension in his shoulders start to melt away. A small smile crept onto his face as he thought of her. Samantha had always been his grounding force, calm and warm where he was methodical and driven. Between her yoga classes and his work, their days were busy, but those quiet evenings together were what he cherished most. Stepping inside, Ethan called out, "Samantha, I'm home," but the house answered him with silence. His brow furrowed as he remembered her mentioning a late yoga class. Shrugging off his jacket, he made his way to the kitchen, intent on grabbing a quick bite before jumping in the shower. On his way past the bathroom, something unusual caught his attention. The trash can was overflowing slightly, and amidst the crumpled tissues, a small white stick stuck out. Ethan stopped mid-step, a strange chill running down his spine as he bent down to take a closer look. His breath hitched when he realized what it was, a pregnancy test. Positive. His heart thundered in his chest as he stared at the unmistakable 2 pink lines. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Just 3 months ago, Ethan had undergone a vasectomy. He hadn't even told Samantha about it, assuming they were aligned in their decision to remain child-free. And yet, here it was, clear evidence that something was amiss. Ethan sank to the bathroom floor, the cool tile pressing against his back as his mind raced in a chaotic whirl. Maybe the test was wrong. Faulty, perhaps. But another thought, darker and far more unsettling, tried to push its way in. No. He shook his head, refusing to believe it. Samantha wouldn't do that to him. She couldn't. But as he sat there, the doubts crept in, each one more troubling than the last, the yoga classes that seemed to stretch later and later into the night, her habit of leaving her phone face down on the table, the emotional distance that had slowly grown between them. No, he whispered aloud, the word feeling empty and weak in the silence. Pulling himself together, Ethan stood on shaky legs and made his way to the bedroom. He needed space to think, to make sense of what was happening. Yet, everywhere he turned, reminders of the life they'd built together stared back at him, their honeymoon photos on the nightstand, the dresser they'd refinished as a weekend project, her pillow still bearing the soft imprint of her head. The walls felt as though they were closing in. Unable to stay in the house a moment longer, Ethan grabbed his car keys and drove aimlessly into the night. His thoughts churned, spinning through every possibility, each one more painful than the last. Hours later, he returned home, his heart heavy but his mind resolved. He wouldn't confront Samantha, not yet. He needed answers, and more importantly, he needed proof. The next morning, Ethan was up before dawn, his sleep plagued by restless tossing and turning. He moved through his morning routine in a daze, showering and getting dressed with a robotic efficiency. When Samantha stirred, he pressed a brief kiss to her cheek, muttering something about an early meeting before heading out. Instead of driving to the office, Ethan parked a block away from their house. He sat in his car, waiting and watching. As Samantha left for her morning yoga session, Ethan slipped back inside, determined to uncover the truth. The house felt eerily still, its quiet almost taunting in its familiar normalcy. Ethan moved from room to room, his search fueled by a strange mix of desperation and dread. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for, a love letter, suspicious text messages, anything that might confirm his fears. Part of him clung to the hope that he'd find nothing, that his suspicions were just the product of overthinking. But another part, colder and more calculating, was already plotting his next steps. In the kitchen, Ethan absently shuffled through a stack of papers on the counter, trying to keep his spiraling thoughts at bay. Then, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening made him freeze. A surge of panic gripped him. Samantha wasn't supposed to be back for hours. Had she forgotten something? He stood perfectly still, every muscle tense as he strained to listen. From the entryway, her voice floated toward him, low but laced with agitation. "Mom, I don't know what to do," Samantha said, her words hurried and trembling. "I can't keep this up for much longer." Ethan's breath hitched, his chest tightening. He crept toward the kitchen doorway, careful not to make a sound, positioning himself just out of sight. "I'll tell him it's his," Samantha continued, her tone uneasy but determined. "Ryan's not ready for a baby. If I push him too hard, he might leave me. And anyway, Ethan's always wanted kids. He'll believe me, he's so trusting." The name Ryan hit Ethan like a blow. His stomach churned, and his grip on the doorframe turned his knuckles white. Ryan, the fitness trainer she'd insisted was nothing more than a friend. The air seemed to shift, heavy and suffocating, as Samantha's betrayal came crashing down around him. Her voice drifted further into the house, but Ethan couldn't move. Rage, betrayal, and a cold, calculated resolve swirled within him, each one clawing for dominance. When he finally moved, it was with a surprising calmness that he hadn't expected. Without making a sound, Ethan slipped out of the house, got into his car, and drove to work. At his desk, he dove headfirst into his projects, working with an almost manic precision. To anyone watching, it was just another day in the life of Ethan Reed. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Plans were taking shape, wheels were set in motion, and the man who had walked into his home that morning no longer existed. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Ethan. He lay motionless in bed, staring at the ceiling, fully aware of Samantha's sleeping form beside him. The sound of her even breathing, once a source of comfort, now left him cold. When she finally stirred and got ready for her morning yoga class, he waited until the door shut behind her before getting out of bed. With a determined efficiency, Ethan began packing. He pulled suitcases from the closet, filling them methodically with his clothes and personal belongings. He moved through the house like a shadow, gathering the essentials while leaving behind the sentimental remnants of their life together. Family photos stayed where they were, he couldn't bear to look at them. Instead, he focused on practical items, his laptop, important documents, and a few cherished keepsakes. In the kitchen, his eyes caught the bathroom trash can in the reflection of a mirror. The pregnancy test was still there, an unspoken accusation. With a grim expression, Ethan retrieved it and sealed it in a small evidence bag he had prepared in advance. He didn't know when, but he knew it might come in handy. Next, Ethan turned to the finances. Logging into their joint accounts, he swiftly transferred every dollar into a private account he had quietly set up years ago. He changed the passwords on his personal accounts, cutting Samantha off completely. Each keystroke felt like a small victory, the hurt in his chest gradually replaced by a cold satisfaction. Let her return to an empty home. Let her feel the sting of betrayal, even if it was just a fraction of what he'd endured. When everything was packed and loaded into the car, Ethan paused to take one last look around the house. Memories flashed before him, holiday dinners, lazy mornings in bed, cozy nights on the couch. But he shoved them aside, hardening himself against the flood of emotions. This house was no longer his home. There was still one final task to complete. Sitting at his laptop, Ethan began typing with precision, the words flowing easily as he drafted an email. The recipient, Emily Mitchell, Ryan's wife. The email was short and to the point, almost clinical. Mrs. Mitchell. I believe this belongs to your husband. Sincerely. Ethan Reed. Attached to the message was a photo of the positive pregnancy test. Without a second thought, Ethan clicked send. Whatever fallout came next was no longer his concern. Let the truth unravel on its own. After a final walk through the house to make sure nothing personal had been left behind, Ethan locked the front door. He didn't spare a glance over his shoulder as he climbed into his car and drove away, leaving the shattered remnants of his marriage in his rearview mirror. Hours later, Samantha returned home, her arms full of grocery bags and a lightness in her step. Today was the day she had resolved to tell Ethan about the pregnancy, spinning the story she had rehearsed so carefully. She was convinced he'd be overjoyed. With the baby news, she could finally untangle herself from the complications with Ryan. Ethan, she called out, nudging the door open with her hip. I grabbed some steaks for dinner. Thought we could celebrate. The silence that met her felt strange, unsettling. Samantha frowned as she set the bags down on the kitchen counter. It wasn't like Ethan to be late without letting her know. She reached for her phone, intending to call him, but paused when something felt off. The house seemed different, emptier somehow. Her heart began to race as she moved from room to room. When she opened the closet, the sight of empty hangers made her stomach drop. His dresser drawers, once overflowing with neatly folded clothes, were now barren. In the office, the shelves where Ethan kept his beloved collection of vintage sci-fi novels stood stripped bare. No, Samantha whispered, panic clawing at her throat. No, no, no. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Ethan's number. It went straight to voicemail. She sent him a text, undelivered. Desperate, she tried emailing him, but the messages bounced back, his account deactivated. Samantha collapsed onto the floor, her head spinning. How much did he know? What had tipped him off? And, most terrifying of all, where had he gone? Feeling the walls closing in, Samantha made the only call she could think to make. Ryan, she said when he answered, her voice tight with fear. We have a problem. Across town, Emily Mitchell sat frozen in front of her computer screen. She didn't recognize the name Ethan Reed, but the email from him had her world tilting. The attachment, a photo of a positive pregnancy test, stared back at her like a slap to the face. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. For years, Emily and Ryan had been trying, hoping, praying for a child, only to be met with disappointment time and again. Now, this stranger was suggesting that Ryan had not only cheated but had fathered a child with another woman. Her jaw tightened as she dialed Ryan's number, a cold determination settling over her. If what this Ethan claimed was true, she would find out. And when she did, Ryan would learn firsthand just how ruthless she could be when betrayed. Meanwhile, in a plain, sparsely furnished apartment on the other side of town, Ethan sat on the edge of a rented bed. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated the room, where a collection of emails, documents, and screenshots filled the screen, bank statements, property records, text logs. He had spent hours meticulously compiling every scrap of evidence, building an airtight case against Samantha and Ryan. At this point, it wasn't just about unearthing the truth. Ethan's objective had shifted. He wanted to ensure their carefully woven web of lies collapsed entirely, leaving them with nothing but the ruins of their deceit. A soft ping from his phone interrupted his focus. An email notification appeared, Emily Mitchell. Ethan allowed himself a brief, grim smile as he opened the message. The pieces were falling into place, and soon enough, Samantha and Ryan would discover the true cost of their betrayal. As night descended on the city, the lives of 4 people hung precariously in the balance. Samantha, frantically dialing numbers that wouldn't connect. Ryan, scrambling to keep his double life from unraveling. Emily, sharpening her resolve for the confrontation to come. And Ethan, the puppet master pulling the strings, watching it all unfold from the shadows. Ethan sat in his small, bare apartment, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the arm of the chair. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound reminding him that Samantha was inching closer to discovering he was gone. He imagined her reaction, the initial confusion giving way to panic as the reality of what had happened sank in. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from Emily Mitchell. "We need to talk in person." A cold smile tugged at Ethan's lips. He quickly typed out a reply, suggesting a quiet cafe on the other side of town. As he hit send, another notification popped up on the screen, Samantha. Her name brought a fresh wave of anger surging through him. Without hesitation, he rejected the call. Across town, Samantha paced back and forth in the living room, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "Come on, Ethan," she muttered under her breath. "Answer the damn phone." The call went straight to voicemail again. Frustration boiled over, and she threw the phone onto the couch with a growl. Her gaze darted around the room, landing on the empty spaces where Ethan's belongings had been. She felt as though her entire world had unraveled in the blink of an eye. The phone buzzed again. Samantha snatched it up, hope flaring in her chest, only to see a different name on the screen. "Ryan," she whispered, answering the call in a rush. "Thank God. I need your help. Ethan's gone. He took everything. I think he knows." "Samantha, stop," Ryan interrupted, his voice cold and clipped. "We can't keep doing this." Her heart dropped. "What are you talking about?" "The affair. The baby. All of it, it's over." There was a pause, heavy and ominous, before he continued in a strained tone. "My wife knows, Samantha. She found out about the pregnancy test somehow." "That's impossible," she breathed, her mind racing. "I was so careful." "Clearly, not careful enough," Ryan snapped, his frustration barely contained. "Do you have any idea what kind of damage this could do to me? My reputation, my business, everything I've built is at stake." Samantha's knees gave out, and she collapsed onto the couch, the phone trembling in her hand. "Ryan, please. We can work this out. The baby is your problem, not mine," he cut her off sharply. "I'm sorry, Samantha, but I can't be involved in this anymore. Don't call me again." The line went dead. Staring at her phone in disbelief, Samantha felt tears spill over, her carefully constructed life crumbling faster than she could comprehend. Meanwhile, Ethan sat across from Emily Mitchell in a dimly lit cafe. She was striking, composed, and polished, but he could see the cracks beneath her surface, the slight quiver in her hands as she held her coffee, the tightness around her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," Emily said, her voice steady but low. "Your email was unexpected, to say the least." Ethan inclined his head, offering a look of quiet sympathy. "I can imagine. And please, call me Ethan. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances." Emily's expression hardened, a mix of pain and fury flashing in her eyes. "How long have you known about your wife and my husband?" "Not long," Ethan admitted, leaning back in his chair. "I found out yesterday. That pregnancy test, it was like a punch to the stomach." Emily's grip on her coffee cup tightened. "Ryan and we've been trying to have a baby for years. I thought," she trailed off, collecting herself with a visible effort. "It doesn't matter what I thought. What matters now is what we do next." Ethan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What do you have in mind?" A faint, icy smile curved at the corners of Emily's lips. "I've been keeping tabs on Ryan's behavior for a while now. Financial records, suspicious transactions. I never thought I'd need to use them. But now you don't have a choice," Ethan finished for her. She nodded, her expression resolute. "Exactly. And from what you've shared about your wife, it seems we both have scores to settle. As they leaned in closer, quietly mapping out their plan, Ethan felt a deep sense of vindication. Samantha and Ryan had no idea what storm was about to hit them. Back at the house, Samantha sat amidst a mess of scattered papers and open laptops. For hours, she had been desperately trying to access their joint accounts, only to find them drained. Passwords had been changed, credit cards cancelled. Ethan had methodically erased her from his financial life. It was as if he had surgically removed her from existence, leaving her grappling with the ruins. The sharp chime of the doorbell startled Samantha, snapping her out of her frantic thoughts. For a brief moment, hope flickered in her chest. Maybe it was Ethan, coming back to talk things through. She rushed to the door and flung it open. Ethan, her words caught in her throat. Standing on the doorstep wasn't her husband, but her mother, Diane Miller. Diane swept past her daughter without waiting for an invitation, her sharp eyes scanning the mess that surrounded them. "Well," she said, her tone heavy with disapproval, "it looks like you've really outdone yourself this time." Samantha let out a weary sigh, her shoulders slumping under the weight of everything. "Mom, please. I'm not in the mood for a lecture." "Oh, but that's exactly what you need," Diane shot back, settling onto the couch like she owned the place. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Samantha. We need to talk about how you're going to fix this mess." Reluctantly, Samantha sank into the chair, her voice hollow. "There's nothing to fix, Mom. Ethan's gone. He knows everything, about the affair, about the baby. He's left me with nothing." Diane's eyes narrowed, her expression calculating. "Nothing? Don't be so dramatic. You're pregnant. That alone has to count for something." A bitter laugh escaped Samantha's lips. "It's not his child, and you know it." Diane waved her hand dismissively, as though that detail was of no consequence. "That doesn't matter. What matters is what you can prove. Right now, you're a pregnant woman whose husband has abandoned her. That's the story you tell." Samantha stared at her mother, disbelief etched across her face. "You want me to lie? To trick Ethan into raising a baby that isn't his?" "I want you to be smart," Diane said sharply. "You've made your choices, Samantha, and now it's time to figure out how to live with them. Ethan has a good job, a stable income. He's dependable. He'd be a far better father than that gym rat you've been messing around with." A wave of nausea rolled over Samantha, and it wasn't from the pregnancy. "I can't believe you're even suggesting this." Diane rolled her eyes, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Oh, grow up, Samantha. This is how the real world works. You need to think about your future, and the future of that baby. Ethan's angry now, but trust me, men soften up when children are involved. He'll come around." As Diane continued outlining her scheme, Samantha felt a crushing sense of desperation. Was this really her life now? Lies, manipulation, and using an innocent child as leverage. But the cold reality pressed down on her: no money, no job, and a baby on the way. Slowly, reluctantly, she nodded along. What other options did she have? Across town, Ethan was busy executing his own plans. After an afternoon spent strategizing with Emily, he returned to his temporary apartment and sat down at his laptop, a determined focus in his eyes. First, he drafted an email to his company's HR department. In a few concise paragraphs, he explained that he and Samantha were separating due to her infidelity and requested that she be removed from his insurance and any other shared benefits immediately. Next, he composed a series of messages to their mutual friends. He didn't delve into specifics, but the subtext was clear: Samantha had betrayed him, and he was cutting her out of his life. Finally, Ethan opened a blank document and began methodically outlining his case for divorce. Every detail went in: the affair, the financial deceit, the lies about the pregnancy. With each line he typed, his resolve hardened. By the time he was finished, he leaned back in his chair, a grim satisfaction settling over him. The net he'd been weaving was nearly complete. As he prepared to close his laptop, his phone buzzed again, a missed call from Samantha. His finger hovered over the block button, but instead, he set the phone aside. Let her stew in the silence a while longer. They'd have their confrontation soon enough. The next morning dawned bright and deceptively calm, a cruel contrast to the chaos brewing beneath the surface. Ethan dressed with care, choosing a crisp suit that projected both confidence and control. Today marked the beginning of the end for Samantha's carefully constructed world. Piece by piece, he would dismantle it until there was nothing left standing. Ethan's first stop of the day was the law office of Claire Hendricks, the divorce attorney who had quickly become a crucial ally in his plan. As he laid out the details of his case, Claire's eyebrows inched higher with every word. "Well, Mr. Reed," she said once he finished, her tone a mix of surprise and admiration, "you've certainly done your homework. With the evidence you've gathered, we're in an excellent position to push for a swift and favorable divorce." Ethan gave a curt nod, a cold smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. How soon can we file?" Claire's answering grin was sharp, almost predatory. "I'll have the papers ready by this afternoon. Let's aim for 3 p.m. "Perfect," Ethan replied, standing with a sense of purpose. As he left the office, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a text from Emily. "It's done. I've filed for divorce and alerted the authorities about Ryan's financial discrepancies. The storm is about to hit." Ethan paused on the sidewalk, allowing himself a brief moment of satisfaction. Everything was falling into place, just as he'd planned. Meanwhile, Samantha was waking up to her own personal disaster. A flood of messages lit up her phone, texts from friends expressing shock, disappointment, and judgment. Ethan had clearly been busy. Her phone rang, the caller ID showing the gym where she worked as a yoga instructor. A sense of dread washed over her as she picked up. "Samantha, it's Jeff," came her boss's voice, strained and serious. "We need to discuss your position here." Her stomach dropped. "Jeff, please, whatever you've heard." "I'm sorry, Samantha, but this kind of drama is bad for the studio's reputation. We have to let you go." The line went dead, leaving Samantha staring at the phone, stunned. In less than 24 hours, she had lost her husband, her lover, and now her job. What else could possibly go wrong? Her answer came moments later with a knock at the door. She opened it to find a courier holding a thick envelope. "Samantha Reed?" he asked. She nodded numbly, and he handed her the package. "You've been served." Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Divorce papers. Ethan was suing her for infidelity and financial deception, and the envelope was packed with evidence, photos, bank records, and text messages. The weight of it all finally broke her. She crumpled to the floor, papers scattered around her, and let the sobs she'd been holding back take over. The full consequence of her choices had come crashing down, leaving her in ruins. Across town, Ethan sat in his temporary office, calmly working through his tasks. To anyone watching, he was the picture of professionalism, his focus unwavering. No one would have guessed at the emotional storm he'd weathered or the calculated revenge he was orchestrating. His phone buzzed, displaying a message from Samantha. "Ethan, please, we need to talk. I know I've made terrible mistakes, but don't do this. I'm pregnant. We can work through this." Ethan's jaw tightened as he read the words. His response was swift and unyielding. "The child isn't mine. We both know that." With a firm tap, he hit send and then blocked her number. Enough was enough. As the day progressed, reports started rolling in. Ryan Mitchell had been arrested on suspicion of financial fraud, his gym under investigation. Members were canceling their contracts en masse. Emily had acted quickly and decisively, leveraging her connections to ensure Ryan's professional downfall was both swift and public. By the end of the day, his reputation was in tatters. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a grim sense of accomplishment washing over him. Phase 1 of his plan was complete. Samantha and Ryan's worlds were collapsing, brick by brick. But he wasn't done, not yet. When night fell, Ethan drove to the house he had once shared with Samantha. It was time for the confrontation he had been both dreading and anticipating. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house. The soft glow of the lights inside, which once symbolized warmth and comfort, now felt hollow. They only fueled his cold resolve. Taking a deep breath, Ethan steeled himself for what was to come. Tonight, he would face Samantha, and she would finally see the full magnitude of what she had lost. Ethan climbed out of his car and strode up to the front door. Though he still had a key, he chose to ring the doorbell. Let Samantha come to him. After a pause, the door creaked open. Samantha stood in the doorway, her face pale and blotchy from hours of crying, her hair a tangled mess. She looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling, a mix of relief and fear. "You came back." "Not for long," he replied, his tone cutting and cold. "We need to talk." He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping over the house that had once felt like home. Everything appeared the same, yet it all felt hollow and foreign now. Samantha lingered near him, her expression flickering between hope and dread. "Ethan, she began, but he silenced her with a raised hand. "I'm not here for excuses or apologies," he said flatly. "This conversation is about clarity, nothing more." Samantha's shoulders sagged as she gestured toward the living room. "Can we at least sit down and talk?" Ethan nodded stiffly, though he remained standing as she perched nervously on the edge of the sofa. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, twisting a tissue that was already falling apart. "I got the divorce papers," she said, her voice barely audible. "Good," Ethan replied, his tone unwavering. "Then you know where things stand." Tears filled Samantha's eyes. "Ethan, please. We can fix this. The baby isn't mine," he cut her off, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise." "But we could raise it together," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You've always wanted a family. We could still have that." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "A family built on lies and betrayal? Spare me." He began pacing the room, his frustration evident in every step. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? That you could pass off another man's child as mine and I'd just go along with it?" Samantha winced, her voice barely above a whisper. "I made a mistake, Ethan. A horrible mistake. But I love you. We can get through this." "Love?" Ethan spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have betrayed me with your gym trainer." The crude words hit her like a slap. "That's not fair, Ethan. Ryan and it wasn't planned. It just—" "Don't," he snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare say it just happened. This wasn't an accident, Samantha. You made a choice, a selfish, destructive choice. And now, you get to live with the consequences." He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression hard and unyielding. "Here's how this is going to work. You're going to sign the divorce papers. You're going to pack your things and move out of this house. And you're going to stay out of my life." Her voice wavered as she stood, desperation etched across her face. "But where will I go? I've lost my job. I don't have any money." "That's not my problem," Ethan said icily. "You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat." "Ethan, please," she begged, her tone breaking under the weight of her despair. "I'm pregnant. I can't do this on my own." For a moment, something flickered in Ethan's eyes, a trace of the man who had once cared for her deeply. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a steely determination. "You're not on your own, Samantha. You have Ryan, don't you?" "Oh wait," he said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "He walked out the moment things got messy, didn't he?" Samantha's face crumpled, her voice barely a whisper. How do you know that?" Ethan's smile widened, but it was void of warmth. "I know everything, Samantha. Every lie you told, every secret you kept. And I'm done. You have 1 week to move out. After that, the locks get changed." He turned and walked toward the door, her sobs echoing behind him. Ethan didn't pause, didn't glance back as he stepped outside. His resolve was unshakable. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of meetings and legal maneuvers. Ethan threw himself into his work, using the structure and focus of his projects to channel his pain. His colleagues noticed his sharp focus, but none suspected the emotional storm raging beneath his calm exterior. One sunny afternoon, Ethan was seated at his desk in his new apartment, reviewing contracts, when his phone buzzed. The name on the screen caught his attention, Emily Mitchell. "Ethan, are you free to talk?" He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Of course, Emily. What's on your mind?" Her voice, when it came through the phone, was taut with barely contained excitement. "It's done. The divorce is finalized. Ryan didn't walk away with a single penny." A small smile touched Ethan's lips. "That's great news, Emily. How do you feel?" "Relieved," she admitted, her tone softening. "But, honestly, a little aimless. I've spent so much time focused on taking Ryan down, I'm not sure what comes next." Ethan nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I understand that feeling. But you've got a clean slate now. You can start over." There was a brief pause before Emily spoke again. "What about you, Ethan? How are things with Samantha?" His jaw tightened at the mention of her name. "Progressing," he said simply. "She's out of the house, and the divorce should be finalized soon." "And the baby?" Emily asked hesitantly. Ethan's tone hardened. "Not my concern. Samantha made her choices. Now she can deal with the consequences." After they hung up, Ethan sat in silence for a moment, his satisfaction tempered by a lingering emptiness. Ryan's life was in ruins, his finances obliterated and his reputation in shreds. Samantha was gone, left to face her own self-inflicted downfall. By all accounts, Ethan had won. So why did it feel like a hollow victory? Shaking off the thought, he returned to his work. There was a life to rebuild, and distractions had no place in it. Weeks turned into months. Ethan threw himself headfirst into his career, channeling his energy into climbing the corporate ladder. His focus and determination were unmatched, earning him accolades and respect among his colleagues. His personal life, however, remained deliberately empty. He told himself it was better this way: no ties, no trust, no chance of betrayal. One crisp fall morning, as leaves scattered across the city sidewalks, Ethan stopped by his favorite coffee shop. Latte in hand and briefcase in the other, he was heading toward the office when a voice stopped him cold. "Ethan." He froze mid-step before turning slowly. Standing a few feet away was Samantha. She looked drastically different, thinner, with dark circles beneath her eyes, and her hand resting protectively over her visibly swollen belly. For a moment, the bustling city faded, leaving just the two of them caught in a web of shared history and pain. How are you?" Samantha asked, her voice trembling. Ethan's grip tightened on his coffee cup. "Fine," he said curtly. "And you?" "I'm managing," she murmured, tears welling in her eyes. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Good." "I don't," Samantha started, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say," Ethan replied flatly, stepping to move past her. But her next words stopped him in his tracks. "It's a girl," she said softly. "I'm naming her Lily. After your grandmother." The mention of his grandmother struck Ethan like a physical blow. Lily had been the cornerstone of his childhood, the one person who had always believed in him. Samantha knew how much she'd meant to him. He turned back, his voice low and sharp. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to drag my family into this to manipulate me." Samantha flinched. "I'm not trying to manipulate you, Ethan. I thought you'd want to know." "Know what?" Ethan snapped, his voice rising enough to draw glances from nearby pedestrians. "That you're using my grandmother's name for a child that isn't mine. A child conceived while you were tearing apart everything we built together." Tears streamed down Samantha's face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." For a fleeting moment, memories of their happier days resurfaced, her laughter on lazy Sunday mornings, the light in her eyes during their early years together. But those moments were poisoned now, tainted by lies and betrayal. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Your apologies mean nothing to me, Samantha. You made your decisions. Now live with them." He turned and walked away, ignoring the sound of her muffled sobs behind him. His coffee had long gone cold, but he barely noticed. His mind churned with emotions he thought he'd buried long ago. Back at the office, Ethan found it impossible to focus. Samantha's words haunted him, replaying in his mind no matter how hard he tried to drown them out. By mid-afternoon, he was ready to call it a day when his phone rang. The name on the screen made him pause. It was Emily. "Ethan, is everything okay? You sound off." He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I ran into Samantha today." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh. How did that go?" "About as well as you'd expect," Ethan replied, a bitter edge to his tone. "She's very pregnant." Emily's voice softened. "And how does that make you feel?" Ethan didn't answer right away. The silence stretched before he finally admitted, "I don't know. Part of me wants to hate her. To hate that baby. But another part of you still cares," Emily finished gently. "Yeah," he murmured, almost as if admitting it to himself for the first time. "I guess I do." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Sure," he said cautiously. "What is it? Are you happy?" The question took him by surprise. He blinked, unsure how to answer. I don't know. Are you?" Emily let out a soft, bittersweet laugh. "I'm getting there. It's been hard, but I'm starting to live for myself again. Not for Ryan, not for revenge, just for me." Her words struck a chord, reverberating through Ethan. When was the last time he'd done something solely for himself? Not driven by anger, not consumed by the need to settle a score, but simply because it brought him joy. "Maybe," he said slowly, "it's time I tried that too." As the call ended, Ethan stared at his phone for a moment. Something shifted inside him. The anger that had fueled him for so long began to ebb, replaced by the faintest flicker of hope. Not for reconciliation with Samantha, he knew that chapter was irreparably closed, but for a future where he wasn't defined by betrayal. The next morning, Ethan woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. He dressed carefully, choosing a sharp suit that made him feel grounded and self-assured. Today was the day he would truly start to move forward. His first stop was Claire Hendricks's office. The attorney greeted him with her usual predatory smile. "Mr. Reed, what brings you in today?" Ethan straightened his shoulders. "I want to finalize the divorce as quickly and cleanly as possible." Claire's eyebrows arched slightly. Are you certain? Considering the circumstances, we could push for a more advantageous settlement. I'm sure, Ethan said firmly. I don't want anything from Samantha. I just want this chapter of my life closed. Claire nodded, her expression professional but curious. If that's what you want, I'll ensure it's done. As Ethan signed the final papers, he felt an unexpected lightness settle over him. The weight he'd been carrying for so long seemed to lift. It was over. He was free. Leaving the lawyer's office, Ethan found himself walking toward the park where he and Samantha had once spent countless happy afternoons. This time, instead of bitterness, he felt a quiet sense of peace. The memories this place held were good ones, and he realized he was done letting them be tainted by the pain of the past. He sat on their favorite bench, watching as children played on the swings and couples walked hand in hand along the winding paths. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to imagine a future, a life built not on anger, but on possibility. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from Emily, dinner tonight? I could use a friend. Ethan smiled to himself as he typed a quick reply, absolutely. See you then. As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, his eyes caught a familiar figure moving slowly along the park path. Samantha. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, her face drawn and tired, her expression one of deep sadness and resignation. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. For a moment, the old emotions stirred, pain, anger, betrayal. But they were muted now, overshadowed by something else, pity. Samantha had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences, just as Ethan was learning to live with his. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Then he stood, turned, and walked away, leaving her and the past behind him. That evening, Ethan sat across from Emily in a cozy little restaurant. The soft glow of the candles and the hum of quiet conversation created an atmosphere of warmth. For the first time in a long while, he felt at ease. They talked and laughed, swapping stories about their new lives and sharing tentative plans for the future. As the evening wore on, Ethan realized something unexpected. He wasn't just rebuilding his life, he was beginning to enjoy it again. You know, Emily said thoughtfully, setting her wine glass down, as strange as it sounds, I think I'm almost grateful to Ryan and Samantha. Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Grateful? How do you figure that? She nodded, her expression contemplative. If they hadn't betrayed us, we'd probably still be stuck in those miserable marriages, unhappy, but too comfortable or too afraid to make a change. Now we have the opportunity to find real happiness. Ethan let her words sink in. She was right. As painful and grueling as the journey had been, it had brought him to this moment, a place of growth, strength, and self-discovery. To new beginnings, he said, lifting his glass. Emily's smile lit up her face as she clinked her glass against his. To new beginnings. The conversation flowed easily as they continued their meal, weaving between laughter and shared reflections. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt a quiet anticipation stirring within him. The future stretched ahead, full of unknowns, but instead of fear, he felt excitement. He didn't know where the road would lead, but for once, he was eager to find out. The next morning, Ethan's phone buzzed with a new notification. Groggy but curious, he picked it up and saw an email from Samantha. Ethan. I know you might not even read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. But I needed to say it one last time, I'm sorry for everything. I know that sorry can't undo the damage I've done, but I hope, someday, you can find the happiness you deserve. Samantha. Ethan stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. After a long pause, he took a deep breath and tapped delete. He didn't need Samantha's apologies anymore, nor her attempts at closure. He had already begun building his own version of happiness, one that didn't rely on her or the pain she had caused. As he got ready for work, Ethan caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. The man staring back at him wasn't the same person who had discovered Samantha's betrayal all those months ago. This was someone stronger, more confident, and wiser, someone who had fought through heartbreak and come out the other side ready to take on whatever life had to offer. With a small, confident smile, Ethan grabbed his keys and stepped out the door. The sun was shining, the crisp air was invigorating, and the world felt full of possibilities. A new chapter was beginning, and he was ready to face it head-on. The story of Samantha's betrayal would always be a part of him, a scar, but not a wound. It no longer defined who he was or where he was headed. Ethan Reed was moving forward, one step at a time, into a future filled with hope. And this time, he wasn't looking back.